Hey there, in this training, we're going to talk about how anxiety impacts your performance as an athlete. So let's get started. When thinking about the impact anxiety has on your performances, we first need to talk about the difference between nerves and anxiety. How many times have you heard the phrase, "It's good to be nervous"? I used to get so irritated because people, coaches, teammates, they'd say, "Oh, it's okay to be nervous. It's good to be nervous." But that terrible feeling I would get, that gut-wrenching feeling I would get before performances, I thought, there's no way that can be helpful. But that's just it. I was misinterpreting nerves and anxiety. When we're talking about nerves, feeling nervous before an event, it's completely normal because it's just your body's response to performing. What happens is our brains produce stress hormones such as adrenaline to help us perform in an optimal way. That is where people say nerves are beneficial. They help you feel motivated. They help you feel focused and ready to perform. However, like I said, they're natural, right? Nerves are natural. When nerves are taken to the next level, you have anxiety. Performance anxiety is a much more intense case of nerves. But more importantly, it's about the frequency of this anxiety. When you have pre-performance jitters, just that kind of normal nervous feeling, for the most part, it's going to be reserved for that morning, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse until the game starts, and then it's going to go away. Performance anxiety, this likely starts the night before, right? You're laying in bed thinking about all that could go wrong tomorrow. It worsens as you get closer and closer to the game, but then once the game starts, it continues. You keep having that anxiety. You make a good play, you start thinking, can I do that again? You have a mistake, or you make a mistake, you think, oh gosh, I don't want to do that again. Anxiety is much more intense than nerves, but it's also much more frequent. It's all about having this fear of failing. So you are in a constant state of worry. When it comes to this performance anxiety, we can break it down into three different factors. The reason that we need to break it down into these three different factors is because it helps when we're wanting to work through and overcome this performance anxiety. Because then you can say, okay, what link in the chain do I need to focus on first that's going to have the most impact on overcoming this performance anxiety? So first, you're going to have cognition. Cognition is all about the mental response you have to a situation. If you're thinking about your game tomorrow, that's going to be cognition. When we're talking about performance anxiety with cognition, for the most part, it's going to be thoughts. But sometimes it's simply just that immediate feeling and that immediate reaction. But it is your mental response to that situation. After you have that mental response, you're going to have an autonomic arousal. This autonomic arousal is very similar to the nervous feeling, right? It's those butterflies in your stomach, shaking, maybe some sweating, some rapid heartbeat, shaky voice. You may get a little bit of lightheadedness. All the typical physical symptoms that you have whenever you're nervous. Now, third is going to be the behavioral response. That behavioral response, typically when we're talking about performance anxiety, has to do with self-sabotage. You feel that autonomic arousal. Now what? Now what are you going to do? What are you going to do to protect yourself? Well, naturally, you probably don't want to quit your sport. So subconsciously, what's going to happen is you might begin to self-sabotage yourself because your mind wants to avoid that anxious situation. Anxiety is there for a reason because anxiety points out things that we're afraid of and it tries to steer us clear, keep us safe. Now that's great when we're in the wild, but when it comes to sports, you don't want to be avoiding these situations. Yeah, it might keep you safe because you don't have to feel the negative emotions that are accompanying a mistake or a failure, but that also means you don't get to succeed. So when you have the behavioral response, you have to be very careful that you don't begin self-sabotaging and you don't begin trying to avoid playing and avoid the situation simply because your mind, your subconscious is trying to protect you from that anxious situation. When we're looking at these three factors, now in this training, we're not going to talk about how to overcome performance anxiety. I've created a whole nother training to that, which I'll link in the description below. But when we're looking at this, right, these three factors, what I would say and what I always talk about and recommend to my athletes I work with is focus on the cognitive response, right? We're going to first focus on what are you thinking in relation to the anxious situation. So what are you thinking before a game? What are you thinking the night before a game? And how is that then going to impact your anxiety? And if we can change the way that you're thinking, we can kind of change the rest of this sequence. But like I said, with this training, we're just talking about the impact of performance anxiety, how anxiety is going to impact you. When we're thinking about how anxiety impacts the way that you play, we are going to talk about it in terms of the mental game challenges that are going to stem from this performance anxiety. And number one is going to be perfectionism. One of the core reasons that you have performance anxiety is the fear of making a mistake. And if you don't want to make a mistake, what is kind of a distorted view of that in your mind? It's, I have to be perfect. So therefore, it's very easy to adopt perfectionism. Perfectionism is this need to be and appear perfect. You're going to have a complete aversion to making a mistake, and you're going to demand such high expectations from yourself. Where trouble happens is once this perfectionism settles in, even if you do play well, you're not going to feel perfect, because if you want to be perfect, you're always going to feel like you're falling short of perfection unless some miracle happens and you attain that perfect ideal view of perfection. But even then, I guarantee you're going to say, oh, I could have done a little bit more. So you get this kind of negative cycle that happens where you're anxious. So then you think, all right, well, I could be perfect. That would solve that. But then you're never actually perfect. And that perfectionism is going to worsen your anxiety, and it's going to lead to you playing fearful, playing tight, and just not playing up to your potential. Next is going to be fear. Fear plays into anxiety because the two are just, they're so close. They're so closely related. When you have fear of failure, when you're afraid to make a mistake, that leads to anxiety. You are now worried about making that mistake. When you have anxiety, when you're dealing with this performance anxiety, you're worried about making a mistake, you're going to fear making a mistake because you don't want to have more anxiety moving forward. When you fear, when you are struggling with the fear of failure, you're going to play tight. You're going to play timidly. You're going to hold yourself back. You're not looking to truly succeed. You're looking to not fail. And that mindset of not failing is not at all the way that you're going to actually perform your best. So instead of saying, I don't want to fail, you have to say, I want to succeed, and start welcoming those mistakes. When you have anxiety, it's very difficult to welcome mistakes because you don't want to fail. You don't want to mess up because you're anxious about that exact thing. So that's ultimately going to lower your performance. Number 3 is poor focus. A lot of times when we're talking about anxiety with poor focus, it's actually because you are focused on the anxiety. This happened to me a lot in college, where before the game and during the game, I was so focused on my anxiety and thinking about how can I get rid of my anxiety that it completely took my attention from the game, and it took my attention away from the present moment and where I actually needed to be paying attention to. That's one of the funny things about anxiety. It is so powerful and the emotions are so intense that it very easily distracts your attention. And it pulls your focus away from the present and pulls your focus away from what you need to be really giving your attention to in order to perform your best. Then lastly is self-doubt. Anxiety stems from worries, right? You're worried about making a mistake. You're worried about not being good enough. You're worried about what's going to happen if you succeed. You're worrying about having to be a leader on the team and talk in front of your teammates. All of that is really coming from what? All of that is coming from self-doubt. You don't believe that you're good enough to succeed. You don't believe you have the skills to sustain success. You don't believe that you're confident enough in yourself and that you can stay calm enough to be a leader and talk in front of your teammates. When you have anxiety, this performance anxiety, it's because of self-doubt. And that self-doubt is going to keep you from having the trust that you need in yourself to truly succeed and truly reach your potential within your sport. So that's how performance anxiety can really negatively impact you as an athlete. It's not at all something to be downplayed. It is a very serious thing to deal with. It's a very intense mental game challenge. However, it can also be overcome. Like I said in the description below, I've put a link to another free training that walks you through some steps and some techniques you can use to overcome performance anxiety. But in addition to that, if this is something that you're really struggling with, then it's probably time that you work one-on-one with someone. So I'm also going to link in the description a link to my one-on-one mental game coaching page where you can learn a little bit more about the program and then also go ahead and start that process if it seems like a good fit for you. I hope you enjoyed this training, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out 2 new trainings each week on sports psychology and mental training to help you build a championship mindset. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.